Hello ladies and gents, in this video we will talk about internationalization in UI5. Now currently in our application we have some hard-coded texts like this one, this button text which says create new product. But we might have different users who prefer different languages on their browser settings, and we would like to implement translations basically for all the texts in our application. And how we do that is we need to create a resource model for our application, and we begin by creating a new folder in our application named i18n, which is an abbreviation for internationalization, by the way. I and N is the first and last letters, and for the other 18 characters in between we just say 18. And we create a new file inside i18.properties file. And this file should consist of key value pairs. For example, let's create a key for this button text here. Let's name it button text create equal sign, and we copy this button text from here. And now we need to create a special resource model using this file. And then we need to set it to our component because we want it to be available to the whole application basically. We will talk in much more detail about models and hierarchy in later videos, but now just go for it. And in order to set this resource model in our component.js file, first we need to override the init function of the component. So we say init. And first we have to call the function of the parent first. Let's create a command actually for that. Call the init function of the parent. And we say UI component that, which we imported here as a dependency. Prototype that init. And to call it, we call the apply function. We pass in the this object, which points to our component, and then all the other arguments we get. And next, let's create and set our resource model. Another command, set resource model. First, let's create it, our i18n model. Let's call it that. Equals, then we need to import another dependency here, which I mentioned before, a special resource model, and it resides in sub UI model resource / resource model. Oops, I see a typo. Let's copy the name into our function. We say model equals new resource model, and we just need to pass in an object here with the property bundle name, and then the whole path to our bundle file, which is i18n.properties, we barely created. Again, we begin with the namespace as always, so UI5 product.lists. And then the name of the folder i18n, then the name of the file without the extension is again i18n. Now let's set this model to our component. We can access it by this keyword, and then we say set model and pass in the model we have just created. Now how do we use this model in our views? So let's replace this text to use the internationalization, the resource model. First, since this will be a binding, we first have to wrap everything in curly braces. And then we start with the name of our model, which is, oops, we haven't specified it yet. So let's do it. First parameter with set model function is the model itself, and the second is the name. And we set the name of the model as i18n, and in the binding we begin with the name of the model and then greater sign and then the key of our text. So button text create. We put it in, save it. Let's go back to our application. Okay, we have an error. Argument is not defined because it should be named as arguments plural. Let's go back. Okay, we again see the button. We have some more errors. I think I briefly mentioned about this error here, component preload.js. When we build a UI5 application, it's going to create an uglified and compressed version of our resources basically, and it will be named component-preload.js. But since we are just in development mode and we're not building anything, it's missing, but it's not mandatory. So this explains these preload errors here, and the rest is, it says 404 for i18n underscore n file and i18n underscore gv.properties. So this is the language setting on my browser, and it's looking for that specific file in my i18n folder, but it cannot find it. So it falls back to the file we created, which is named just i18n.properties, which is also called as the developers file. So when the browser cannot find a file related to your language setting, it's going to fall back to this file here. And we have seen how we can utilize it in XML views. Now let's also see how we can use it from JavaScript. For example, here in our app.controller.js, we also have a hard-coded message here. So let's fix this as well. In this function here, first let's access our resource model. We say var or bundle equals this. So this again refers to our controller this time. And then we have a method which is named getOwnerComponent, which will return the owner component of this controller, which is our component.js file. And then we have another method to call getModel, and then we pass in the name of our model, which we specified as i18n. So let's copy it. And then since this is a resource model, we get another function here, which is named getResourceBundle. Now we can use this bundle to access our messages. Let's remove this. But first let's create a new entry for this text here. New product created. So I copy it. Let's call it message product created and paste it. Now I will copy the key. And let's replace this with our bundle that we get a method named getText, and we just pass in the key of our text. Let's save it. Go back to the application, refresh it just to be sure, click, and everything still works. Now let's talk about the other languages. Like I said, we need to specify the language code with an underscore. So let's first create a new file here for German. We call it i18n underscore de.properties. And what we do is we just copy all our texts, which is very convenient. And then we just translate it. Now, since I don't speak German, I will just say the texts and say in German. Now let's go back. Everything is the same. Now let's change the browser language to German.
Two hours later.
I had to take a short break there. Apparently I have to get out of the guest session so I can change the language. Now if we check the language from the settings here, the first one at the top is German, so our application is displayed in German. Every text is in German. We can also create another file for the English version, so we can use this i18n just for development purposes. We don't have to, but let's do it anyway, which would be called i18n en.properties. We can just paste the whole thing. And let's switch back to English. And we are back in English again. And errors, you can also see it's looking for a specific file which would be named as i18n-en-us, specific to English US. So we can also create a file for this and a separate one named en_GB for Great Britain. So you can even differentiate between the two versions of English language that can be selected. And before we finish, let's also see how we can pass parameters into our resource bundle. So let's go back to our i18n file. And let's say we want to include the name or type of the product that has just been created, just for demonstration purposes. And for that syntax, we use curly braces. We say we want to insert a variable here, and we numerate it with 0. If we would have another one, let's say here, it would be 1, 2, and so on. Let's go with 1 for now. And if we have a variable here, when we call the getText method of our bundle, we can pass in a second parameter here, which would be an array. And since we have only one variable here, we just pass in that one. Let's say we created a MacBook Pro here. We save it, go back. So if we click, oops, not working. Because it's using the i18_n file. Let's also add the variable here. Nope, not here. Here. We test again, and we can see the parameter we passed into our message. So that will be all for this video, and I hope to see you in the next one.